Hey, everybody. Hey, beloveds. How are you doing? I hope you're doing great. Wow, what a day. I've had an interesting day today. Really good day. Made some good contacts for business, and I've studied up some things for you. And I'm concerned. I'm shot out of a cannon. I'm hot, y'all. I'm mad about all this black on black crime. We got these G men. We got these A boys, man. We got this gang out here on the West Coast. I don't know if you guys know about it. It's just fighting over these turf wars. I don't know where they get this from. I mean, I just wish we could go back to our African roots and just love on one another. Ah, well, the reality is that as beautiful as Mother Africa is, we go back to our roots, we find out that those G men and those A boys are actually two warring tribes. We got the Gon tribe and we got the Ashantis. And unfortunately, where we find ourselves, I want you to go back for me in history, go back to around 1850. And I just want you to imagine this young man, 10 years old. Oh man, he's just playing by the river, Donker and Sowell. He's just playing by the river just like 10-year-old boys would do. And he's frolicking and he's just having a really good time. Then he hears the pant, the moan, and the groans and the yells of his parents. And then he hears these footsteps coming closer and closer. These Ashanti tribesmen. Nothing new for these tribes to be warring, but unbeknownst to him, this is something totally different. They don't just take over his village, they round up the village and they begin marching them some 10 miles down that river, down this Donker and Sewell River, and take them and they all along the way they're beating him and they're mistreating him. And this is something totally different from how they would war before. They get down to this river, and just before they get to the river, there's some white men and some black men with branding irons, and they're branding the men on the arms and they're branding the ladies on their breasts. And it's just a horrific scene, a scene the likes of which, a 10-year-old boy, this is out of this world. He thinks that he's in some sort of nightmare, and he's blinking his eyes rapidly. He's trying to wake up. There's no way that this 10-year-old Gyasi believes that even his warring tribe, even the Ashantis, would do him so. Some go into this river after they've been branded, and some have been beaten, and they go into this river and they're bathed, and some don't make it, even from the atrocities, just from being branded and beaten. Some don't make it. They kill themselves right there. And the blood is let right there in that river, that gold-flecked river that Gyasi has been playing in since the days of his birth. The journey isn't over. Then they have to walk some 40 more miles down to Cape Coast, where they're all put into dungeons. And while they're in these dungeons, the smell is horrific. The treatment is horrific. You can smell the smell of feces and of women's menstruation cycles, and the women and the men and the children are all put in cells on top of each other, and they're made to vomit and defecate right there in the same dungeon cells. And then you can hear above them songs where they're actually having church service above the horrors. And then after this, after weeks go by, what seems like years to this young man, Gyasi is loaded onto a ship. This story is a story that may or may not be familiar to you, but it did happen. That river is actually called Slave River. And Yvonne and I went and visited it a couple years ago. And we took our shoes off and we put our feet in that water, and there's still gold flecks even in that water today. I start with that story because I want us to rightfully understand the atrocities of white supremacy and racism. And I want us to understand that there was some with skin as dark as ours that were complicit in it. Now, I'm going to stop you right there. I don't want you not loving our brothers throughout the diaspora, our sisters throughout the diaspora. That's not why I'm saying this, but I want us to have a full understanding, as they do. When we were at that Slave River, the Ashanti king, we were told, had apologized for their complicity in the slave trade. So it is known. White supremacy and racism. I know. You tuned in here. We're supposed to be talking about wealth. But if we don't understand white supremacy and racism, nothing else is going to make sense. Nothing else is going to make dollars and cents. So that's why we're starting there. Let's first look historically. Let's just kind of talk about, let's get some text under us. I'm going to read from The Destruction of Black Civilization. And this book by Chancellor Williams it is required reading, y'all. You should really take a look at this. It'll give you pride in, first of all, being called black. There's nothing wrong with being called black because our ancestors were from, in antiquity, what was called the land of the blacks. And it draws us to the soil. The soil is dark and we're dark too. It was called the land of the blacks. Even going all the way back into into antiquity, 3100 BC, as far back as that. I want to begin reading for you in page 67. So we can kind of talk about, we need to get, how did we get to the point where we were giving up our sisters and brothers to Portuguese and other Europeans for slavery? Let's dig into the mindset. We're at 3100 BC, and I'm reading the chapter called Ethiopia's Oldest Daughter, Egypt. So that tells you where we are. We're in 3100 BC again. For they were, as a race, too ready to forgive and forget past evils committed by foreigners. Whereas, on the other hand, a fellow African tribe could easily become a traditional enemy and continue as such for so many generations that no one could remember what the original quarrel was all about. See, this black on black thing has been going on since antiquity. So I want us to have grace there. I want us to have grace with this generation with this black on black crime. We need to deal with it. We certainly need to deal with it, but I don't want us to deal with it as if it's something new, because it's not. It is something that I believe, unfortunately, it is a mutation that is in our DNA that we got to weed this out. Got to give each other grace. Got to begin with love. I read further. Now we come to 1272, Upper Egypt. Why am I doing this? I want us to understand the basis of white supremacy and racism. How did it creep in? 1272, how slavery came to be confined to blacks alone. But in 1272, the blacks, and what I have attacked as the pattern of their own self-destruction, made the first major step to their end. Goes down, talks about the Treaty of 652, and talks about leader refusing to pay tribute. He organized a strong invading expedition with Skakandu as its head and entered the Black Land. The struggle was long and bitter as the Sultan's strategy in using the Black Army, along with Skakandu's own followers, made it appear to be civil war between blacks. In the end, the Sultan won through the black heir to the throne and allowed him to be crowned king as his protege. So we're fighting each other to try to get a crown. Once again, learning nothing from even just yesterday, the black leadership paved the way for further Arab advances into their country. The black leadership struggle for personal power and above all their own personal security and welfare precluded their concern for the welfare and future of their people. They were quite willing and ready to welcome the Arabs and to surrender their people to them in exchange for high office and limited consideration. The days of the black immortals seemed to have passed forever. Mental pygmies again occupied the throne once held by Menes, Pianki, Sabaka, and Kauliudos. So you see here in 1272, lured by foreigners, we want something that's outside. And we do that too much today, in my opinion. We want to hearken to someone in another neighborhood, something in another state, there's something better over there, or we need to fix something over there. We need to fix home. Let's work on home. Let's work on self, home, and then let's get out into the community, and then out into the diaspora. The enslavement of prisoners of war, which was the way general slavery began, was the order of the day. Race had no bearing on the matter then. Whites, blacks, browns, or yellows, all were made slaves if captured. We're in 1316, y'all. The Arabs also made a practice of creating strong slave armies. The white slave armies were the Mamelukes. These, when stationed in Egypt, revolted, overthrew the government, and established their own line of ruling sultans. For this, they were hated by the Arabs and looked upon with scorn, even though they had been converted to Islam. The white ex-slaves hated their former slave masters even more. I'm on page 153 in The Destruction of Black Civilization. I'm going down further on this page 153. White slavery ended after the Mameluke Rebellion. Thereafter, Black Africa became the exclusive hunting ground for slaves, a situation made easy by the developments outlined in this work. All the theories of inherent Black inferiority stem from the urgently felt need to justify the success in confining slavery to the African race. So there it is, y'all. There was a time, this is an inflection point in history. There was a time when everybody was enslaved. And now here we are in 1316, and we have this inflection point where blacks are becoming the go-to people to be enslaved. I turn to page 252, 251 and 252. Got to find these origins of why, how did white supremacy creep in? We're in the 16th century now. During the first stages of the slave trade, many African chiefs and kings actually thought they were supplying workers needed abroad and at a great profit to themselves. They had not had experience with the white man's slave system or its equation with race. Not at first, we have said. But as the decades passed, and the Congo state is a good example, many Africans became enmeshed in the horrors of the trade. They knew what they were doing, and in the pursuit of guns and riches, became as brutal as the whites in dealing with their own kind. So no more. We just have to tell it like it is. Our brothers and sisters knew what they were doing. They knew what they were doing by allowing these Portuguese, other European enslavers to come and take our brothers and sisters and put them on ships. I want to read too, just so we have some more foundation, back to post-traumatic slave syndrome, Dr. Joy DeGraw, because I want to deal with what this modern day racism, right? This, because racism really is a construct that happened in the 18th century. Around, I don't know, Linnaeus lived from 1707 to 1778. He's one of the architects of racism and white supremacy as we know it today. Do we even understand? Do we understand racism and white supremacy? I mean, really? Because we say silly things. I mean, I've heard us say some silly stuff. Like we're racist against this. We're black folks. We're no. Racism, white supremacy is a system created by those in power. And then racism is this myth started by Linnaeus that there is some species, there's differences, so much differences in the races that whites are superior to blacks in the end. It looks like this. Let me put this video on. Did that explain it for you? Yeah, yeah. I hope you kind of understand it better. It's a race that we don't have to be in. We can get outside of that race. Let me get to this post-traumatic slave syndrome, because Dr. DeGraw does such a good job of explaining. She goes in the first 40 pages of the book, she's trying to explain cognitive dissonance, this idea where you basically, you know what wrong is, but you trick your brain into not thinking that wrong is wrong. And it is out of this cognitive dissonance that we get this heinous treatment of slaves, and is how we get to this white supremacy and racism. I'm reading on page 42 of her book. Thanks to Linnaeus, we can know the place of each kind of plant and animal we find on Earth. Yeah, he's the one that came up with all these floras and faunas and all the different systems that we use to categorize plants and cattle. The problem, I continue to read, the problem was he went too far. He expanded his system to try to account for different types of humans, and unlike his previous work, his classifications of humans and considerably fewer objective descriptors his classifications for humans used considerably fewer objective descriptors. With this highly suspect effort to classify humans, Linnaeus began the science of anthropology and laid the foundation for 19th century beliefs about race that resulted in racism. In his System Naturae, He set forth this race classification system using skin color as a criterion for classifying races, while also assigning moral and intellectual capacities to each race. These concepts became a permanent part of 19th century anthropological thought and language, according to Haller in his book, Outcasts from Evolution. Linnaeus describes Homo americanus as reddish, choleric, obstinate, contented, and regulated by custom. Homo europaeus as white, fickle, sanguine, blue-eyed, gentle, and governed by laws. Homo asiatus as sallow, grave, dignified, avaricious, and ruled by opinion. And Homo afer as black, phlegmatic, cunning, lazy, lustful, careless, and governed by caprice. You see that? This is the origins of white supremacy and racism, where we cause scientifically, even though this is an opinion, there is no science to back this up. We hide behind science and say that blacks are inherently inferior. Now, it's one thing for them to say it. It's another thing for us to believe it. And that's where the true wealth comes in. We have to change the way we think of ourselves and our brothers and sisters. Remember in that skit, that little example that I did in the water and the duckies. Remember, you had the one duck that had completed. What do they keep saying? Rules are the rules. Rules are. Grace, folks. Am I saying I want disorganization and chaos? No. Go back to the film that I did on Who Am I? I'm a husband and a father of 5. I got to have order around here. But I also have grace and I also have freedom. And that's what I'm talking about. That is wealth. That's wealth. So let's practice a little mental wealth. How about that, right? Let's do some affirmations. I would recommend, I don't know, you take, I've taken Queenie's lipstick and wrote them on the mirror. Or how about leave the lipstick alone? I won't get you in trouble. How about you use some dry erase markers, but put it on your mirror, put it somewhere where you can see it. There's some affirmations. I am the prayers of the enslaved. How about that one? I am realizing wealth that has always been mine. We've been to the river. There was gold flecks in the river. We let them fool us into valuing what we had. Now all the gold mines are owned by them. I am flowing wealth to my descendants and even their descendants. I like that one. Beloveds, I sure hope you got something out of this lesson today, this discussion. Please put down in the comments what you think about them. And if you didn't get a chance to, some of you maybe this is your first time, maybe wonder, okay, well, what gives him the right? Go to the video where I talk about my credentials. And then if you want some more video that talks about this, our needing to stop being the bringer of rules and us needing to be the bringer of grace, go to this video on Miss Shakara Richardson. All right. Amen. And I say goodbye, beloveds.